As I was going, Linda called me on Friday and said, "Can you do this?" And I'm going, "Sure, I can do that." Then I started putting things together and went, "Oh, tell me about this." The wedding feast at Cana. Now, the one nice thing about being here with all of you, you probably know who Johnny Carson is. As you know, he was the host of The Tonight Show before Leno, before Jimmy Fallon. On one show, he had an 8-year-old boy on. The boy appeared because he had rescued 2 of his friends from a coal mine in his hometown in West Virginia. Now, as Johnny questioned him, it became apparent that this boy went to church and he was a Christian. So Johnny asked him if he attended Sunday school, and when the boy said he did, Johnny then inquired, "Well, what did you learn in Sunday school this week?" The boy said, "Well, last week we said our lesson was about when Jesus went to a wedding and turned water into wine." And the audience just roared, but Johnny tried to keep a straight face. And then he said, "And what did you learn from that story?" And the boy thought about it and squirmed a little bit in his chair, but then he lifted up his head and said, "If you're going to have a wedding, make sure you invite Jesus." I think the boy was on to something. You know, the Jews attached great importance to the high moments of life, and thus a wedding was not just a brief ceremony, but this was an experience that was shared by the entire community and could last for days. You know, it could last up to 7 days. The ceremony would begin on a Tuesday night. After the wedding ceremony, the father or bride would take the daughter to every house in town that everyone might congratulate her. And that sounds strange to our modern way of thinking, you know, but weddings were a time of joy and they were a community experience. At the wedding which Jesus attended in Galilee, there was great joy, but problems occurred. There was a shortage of wine. Now that was one of those things that became a social embarrassment. It was also a symbol. For a wedding to run out of wine was an omen that meant there was little chance of this particular marriage reaching its full potential. Maybe joy was not meant for this couple. So Mary approaches Jesus and asks him to do something. His response, "What do you want me to do about it?" Said, I'm not the steward. I'm not the concierge." Sounds kind of harsh, so unlike Jesus, but you have to look at this scene in its historical context. Said, at this moment, Jesus had not performed any miracles or signs. He was 30 years old and had just gathered together his disciples. And he knows that when he performs a miracle, a clock will start ticking that will not stop until he reaches Calvary. His privacy and anonymity will be gone, watching and waiting for him to slip up and make a mistake, as the establishments will start to keep tabs on him. He concludes that it is as with everything being in its place, he makes his move later on, and he gives this first public sign that he is different when he transforms that water into wine. It's a crucial moment for Jesus and his disciples. First, let's look at the wine itself. It was a custom at that time to serve the best wine first, and the lesser wine later. And let's be honest, we are not just talking about the taste. The best wine also had a higher alcohol content. You know, it's logical. The best wines cost more. If you want to impress your guests with the good stuff, well, you serve them the good stuff when they're sober enough to enjoy the flavor, rather than serving it when the people are drunk and probably couldn't tell the difference between a $4,000 bottle of Chateau Lafite Rothschild and another bottle of $4 Chuck. So it's a pleasant surprise when the new vintage is presented to the master of the banquet, and because this wine was better than the earlier one. Turning the water into wine has long been viewed as one of Jesus' more unique miracles. It's not one of those big spectacles like feeding 5,000 people on a hillside. Poor planning is what perhaps caused this wedding to come to a screeching halt. But this miracle was known only to a few, to the disciples and to the servants who brought it in. Mary seems to have something in mind when she spoke with her son. She asks Jesus to do something. It's unclear if she's asking for a miracle or if she's asking for Jesus to take up a collection so that the servants can go out and buy more wine. But whatever the case, it's an imposition on her son. But then mothers are known to impose themselves on their sons. Like most children do when mom tells us to do something we don't want to do, Jesus was not especially pleased. What does this have to do? I'm not the caterer. And like most of us do, or perhaps would have done, we then, after we complain about it, we relent and then we go and do it anyway. And so this is what he did. And the scriptures say this was the first of his miraculous signs. Secondly, at this critical moment, it marks the beginning of Jesus' ministry. A second thing is done. His glory is revealed. It's remarkable that Jesus to expose or reveal his ministry with this miracle. By all measures, it's not one that is very flamboyant. It wasn't on the par with the parting of the Red Sea and crushing, or when it retracted and crushed the Egyptian army. It wasn't as impressive as later on when he raised Lazarus from the dead. It wasn't as public as the feeding of the 5,000. Only the servants seemed to know what actually happened. But the one that lets us know but it is one that lets us know who Jesus is, lets us know that the Messiah has arrived, simply corrects a bit of poor planning on the part of this wedding caterer. But it's almost anticlimactic. The story ends in this way. This was the first of the miracle signs. He revealed his glory. Why this one? Why not something more theatrical? I think maybe it's because this miracle defines Jesus' ministry. It's not packed with persuasive power. It is rather driven by a humble act of service. Bill Yancey, in his book, The Jesus I Never Knew, described it as the wine came from huge 30-gallon jugs that stood full of water at the front of the house that were there for observant Jews to fulfill the rituals of cleansing before they participated in the ceremony. Even a wedding feast had to honor the burdensome rituals of cleansing. Jesus, perhaps by the twinkling of his eye, transformed those jugs, ponderous symbols of the old way, into wineskins, harbingers of something new. From purified water of the Pharisees came the choice new wine of a whole new era. The time for ritual cleansing was now past. The time for celebration had begun. And prophets like John the Baptist preached judgment. But Jesus' first miracle, though, was one of tender mercy. Remarkable that his glory is revealed in such a simple act. It's a small gesture made all the more remarkable because of whom it is. The master of the banquet being eloquent, served by the master of all things. And thirdly, it's a critical moment. At this moment, three critical things are set in motion. First, the miracle is performed. Second, Jesus' glory is revealed. And the third thing is that for the disciples, this is where faith begins. Let me ask you, why do you think the disciples have faith in Jesus? It can't be just because of the miracle. They have been with Jesus only a few days. They have heard a little bit about his teaching, but not seen him do anything that would lead them to believe that he is anything but a great teacher. Is it the miracle that seals the deal and wins their devotion, or is it something else? It seems that the miracle is part of it, but not all of it. Something else is at work here. I think about how the history of Israel was taking place, how long they had been around. About this time in history, they have been around as a tribe and a nation for almost over 2,000 years. Think of all the things that they've been through, the beginnings with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, also then to the Moses stories in the Exodus. There's the Joshua and the conquest of the promised land, and the years of tribal wars to gain the promised land. Then comes the rise of the kings, then the work of the prophets, then a civil war that divided the kingdom into two, followed by the captivity in Babylon and more. After that, though, but it's into this world that Jesus steps. It's the world of Jesus' disciples. It's a Greek world, and their little region is now a part of Rome. In a word, the nation's wine had run out. God seems to have abandoned Israel, and the disciples, along with the nation, have lost some hope. What are you going to do? And what do you do when the wine runs out? I guess that's a big question. It happens in our own lives and in our world. Sometimes it seems that the wine runs out. The crises seem to grow so large, and the opportunities get so low. And sometimes, what we're doing when the wine runs out, it seems that the sad truth is that we don't usually turn to God until we have a need, until that wine starts to run out. Jesus was not approached until there was an emergency. We're the same way. We usually come when we have a need. I'm not saying that this is right or even undesirable. Jesus said, "Come to me when you are tired and weak and under heavy burdens, and I'll give you rest." He says, "Come to me when the wine's running low." But I'm simply saying that it's a fact of life that religion for many occur only when there is a crisis situation. And I think it happens in our world as well. It isn't until there's a crisis, and typically a crisis that affects us, or affects a person, that we're not really concerned about many of the situations around the world. It's not until fires are consuming our communities that we think about forest management and reservoir levels and more. It's not until a bridge collapses and we get concerned about public safety. We don't get concerned until it's my house that's burning, or tornadoes are damaging my community, or when my property taxes are going up, or when my food prices are increasing, or when my gas goes over $4 a gallon, or I have to take out a loan for a dozen eggs. It's when my jar starts being empty that I start to look for relief. Mary came to Jesus when wine jars were empty. And we will come too, but oftentimes not until we're drained or exhausted, or when life's unpredictable demands have left us at wit's end. The disciples put their faith in Jesus not solely because of a miracle of turning water into wine, but because they saw in Jesus hope. Hope for a solution in their time of crisis. You know, for the nation of Israel, the nation's wine was now gone. The disciples saw in Jesus a new wine, a new way, a new teaching. Who knows, perhaps this could even be the Messiah. Jesus changed water into wine, but soon he will also transform ordinary lives with a new exhilaration. Jesus touches that wedding, not just with the miracle of wine, but also with the miracle of his presence. He takes this ordinary wedding and transforms it into something extraordinary. He takes a fisherman by the name of Peter and transforms him into a great preacher of Christianity. He takes a studious and insecure young clergyman by the name of John Hus and also Wesley, and uses them to be part of the world's great Reformation. He takes a young, frail, frightened girl and transforms her into a defender of and advocate for the poor. Some will call her sister, some will call her mother, some will call her saint. But I think God saw her first simply as Teresa. I think he also took an ordinary peanut farmer from Georgia, gave skills to become to lead a world toward peace, and gave us an example of what a loving and faithful spouse could be, and also gave us an example of compassionate service. This is what I missed it. Where'd I go? So the question becomes, out of all this, is your wine running out? I think, are we starting to lose hope? Are we starting to feel alone? The lesson was not lost on Jesus. You know, like that little boy said at the beginning, said, if you're going to have a wedding, make certain you invite Jesus. You know, how soon before we stop just inviting him to our crises, but inviting him to the weddings, inviting him to the celebrations, inviting him to worship. You know, sometimes I wonder, you know, somebody once asked me what would happen if Jesus walked through the back door. And I said, we don't know, because we never expect him to walk through the back door. But what if he did? The lessons were not lost on Jesus' mother or the disciples who joined Jesus at that wedding that night in Cana. I would also say, don't let it be lost on you either. When you need him, when you feel as though your wine has run out, just remember that Christ will be with you. He will be with you to guide you and to comfort you and to give you not just what we want, but what we really need. And if Christ is there with you, the one thing we should probably remember most is that our wine will never run out. And we pray.